Hi, and welcome to News in Depth, on location in Cocoa Beach. I'm John Kelly. Today, we're here at the Hilton Oceanfront for a meeting of President Barack Obama's Space Committee. It's a group of scientists, astronauts, and space policy experts that are looking into the future of NASA and what they decide in the coming weeks and send on to the president could have a profound impact on Kennedy Space Center. The Human Spaceflight Plans Committee has been traveling the country for several weeks now, visiting communities like ours where thousands of people depend on the space program for their livelihoods. The panel members have been debating a wide range of issues about space exploration. They've talked about whether or not to go ahead and retire the space shuttles in 2010 as planned. They've debated the new rockets and spaceships that NASA has been working on to take astronauts back to the moon and someday on to Mars. And they've been debating whether the moon and Mars ought to be the destinations for human space exploration. That topic, where to send astronauts in the future, dominated the conversation here in Cocoa Beach. Let's take a look at some of the highlights from the all-day meeting here at the Hilton.
The shuttle program is going to end when we complete the International Space Station, and it will result in the loss of a significant number of jobs here at the Kennedy Space Center. The transition will be difficult, but in the end, we have a great future. With all that's going on at KSC right now, challenges abound. First and foremost, our challenge is to safely execute our current programs while transitioning to the new exploration program. Next, we have to sustain center facilities and infrastructure during the funding gap between programs. And finally, we have the challenge to retain critical skills post-shuttle as the exploration program ramps up. Safety in the execution of our day-to-day work is paramount. If we have another shuttle incident, the future of U.S. human spaceflight will be at risk for years. I can assure you that the shuttle workforce fully understands this situation, and in spite of the fact that layoffs loom in the future, they are dedicated to ensuring the safe and accurate processing of our vehicles.
The most interesting thing, I think, in this speech was the passage that almost slipped by, but reminds the American people that since 1972, no human has set foot in another world or ventured farther upward into space than 386 miles, roughly the distance from Washington, D.C. to Boston, Massachusetts. 386 miles is as far as we have reached away from Earth in over 30 years. It's time to change that. We explore to expand human civilization. First, in such a way as to protect our planet. The image on the left was a surprise. While we were all watching Neil and Buzz in the White House, a body struck the planet Jupiter, creating a hole in its atmosphere the size of the Earth. We were not tracking this body. Part of the role of exploration beyond LEO is to understand the bodies that might cross our paths and to prepare for the eventuality or certainty that one day one of them will come very close to the Earth. We defined a set of scenarios that allow us to look at particular cases where we might explore. They're listed here, and I'll come back to them in significantly more detail in a few minutes. Scenario A is a lunar base, B is a global lunar exploration scheme, C is to go quickly to the moon and then to Mars, D is to bypass the moon and go directly to Mars, or Mars first, and scenario is an in-space or deep flexible path. Based on the scenario work we've done, we've sort of collapsed it into 3 rather than 5 things we consider. One which is essentially what I just explained as lunar global, an approach to exploration of the moon by visiting many sites, first in sorties and then in longer stays, and with the long-term option of developing a base or outpost. and in an approach which more directly focuses on Mars preparation, at least at the technology and system level and ConOps level. The next option is the one that I called in space, an in-space path with visits to lunar orbit, these special points on the boundary of Earth's influence, the Lagrange points, the near-Earth or Earth-crossing objects, and then eventually Mars orbit, but maintaining an option of a sortie to the lunar surface or visits to the Mars orbit and the moons of Mars later downstream. And finally, the Mars first option, but an exploration program that goes directly to Mars, but we think there's sufficient merit in the test flight to the moon that in a Mars scenario we would include that. I'll wrap up with our recommendation of the committee on an ultimate objective, that our ultimate objective should be viewed as the exploration of and eventual extension of human civilization within the solar system. This is not at all inconsistent with the vision that President Bush created in 2004. It's just that we have to keep our eye on the big prize. This will take a long time, but the time has come, the political alignment is here to allow this to be a goal for our nation, and it's a goal worthy of a great nation.
We have a few findings to present to the committee with respect to science beyond low Earth orbit. The first is that there are certainly some cases where astronauts enable science at a pace that rapidly eclipses what robotic missions can achieve. In particular, that's true in field geology, and especially on Mars and the Moon, and probably on near-Earth objects as well. It's striking that some of the scientists who are most deeply involved with robotic exploration of those objects are among the biggest advocates for sending humans, because they're, as competent field geologists, they're painfully aware of the comparative limitations of the robotic craft. Of course, that has to be tempered with the statement that there is an impressive disparity in cost between robotic and human missions. A second finding is that astronomy that 4 decades ago it would have made sense to do from the moon is often now, and I would say nearly always now, clearly better done from free-flying platforms in space, often at Lagrange points. We know how to do that now, and the moon, in contrast, provides disadvantages rather than comparative advantages.
The extended gap from the perspective of the state of Florida is unacceptable. We think not just for our state, but for our nation. And if there is any option that can bridge that gap, the state of Florida implores you to give it the strongest consideration. Due to the impending gap, Florida is bracing for a hardship, the magnitude of which this state has not seen in decades. NASA's current plan to retire the space shuttle by the end of 2010 and pursue the current constellation projects of record are not expected, as you know, to provide human spaceflight capability to replace the shuttle until 2016. We are anticipating the loss of up to 7,000 direct jobs at the Cape and upwards to 20,000 more with indirect impacts throughout the state of Florida, far more than any other state.
You clearly ought to get rid of the notion that I don't think anybody's taking seriously, that we're going to get rid of the space station in 2015. If we have built this station with our international partners and spent upwards of $100 billion on it, and are just getting some of the main scientific instruments to it, as we will with the AMS, why in the world would we budget for shutting it down in 2015?
The committee chairman says he plans to deliver a report to President Obama by the end of this month. As for the current space program, well, the Space Shuttle Endeavour has just completed one of the most ambitious construction missions ever to the International Space Station. The crew of astronauts installed the last piece of a sprawling Japanese science complex. We wanted to share with you some of the highlights from their mission.
You were able to accomplish quite a bit. It was, 5 spacewalks between crew members and such. Give us a little idea of what you were able to do up there during this trip.
We had a real smorgasbord smorgasbord of activities. Overall, it was a complex choreography of robotics and spacewalks and resupply of the space station internally. We did a repair on a deployment of a platform. We installed the final components of the Japanese module for Koichi's Japanese space agency. We installed batteries on the P6 arrays that had been there 10 years or so and needed changed out. We put several very large spare pieces of equipment that will allow the International Space Station to go quite a few years into the future. And, what else, guys? That's the main idea. It was a very busy, complex choreography, very satisfying to conduct with the whole team. And we also we're bringing Koichi here home, and we dropped off Tim Copra as a new space station crew member. That's pretty important.
30 seconds to touchdown. The landing gear is down and locked. Touchdown. Doug Hurley now deploying the drone chute. And Commander Mark Polanski rotating the nose gear down to the deck. Nose gear touchdown. Endeavour rolling out on runway 15 at the Kennedy Space Center, wrapping up a 6.5 million mile mission. This is the 71st landing at the Kennedy Space Center. Endeavour has completed its 23rd mission and the 127th Space Shuttle mission. It was the 29th to the International Space Station.
Todd Halverson of Florida Today for Dr. David Wolf. Dr. Wolf, you spent a long-term tour of duty on the Russian space station Mir, and in your judgment and experience, could you give us an idea of what types of things Wakata-san has in store for him in the next days and weeks, and what advice you might give him for readapting to life on Earth?
Wakata-san has a very bright future in front of him, that's for sure, in space and on Earth. He's one of the finest astronauts I've ever met. And he'll have to tell us. I think they're coming back in better shape than they used to. A lot of the groundwork we did in Phase 1 led to the kind of exercise equipment that we watched him and the others use, the A-RED. And they look much better to me than the people. It's clear that they're coming back in far better shape. We're beating this long-term space problem back, which will enable the long-duration exploration missions of the Moon-Mars class.
The next launch of the Space Shuttle is set for later this month. If the space program remains on its current course, Discovery's flight would be one of the last 7 missions of the program. Now, on to another issue of importance here on our beaches, sea turtles. South of here, at the Archie Carr Wildlife Refuge near Melbourne Beach, one of the big sea creatures was outfitted with a transmitter and set off on a sort of race that also doubles as an educational opportunity for conservationists. We were there for the release and wanted to share some of that footage with you.
Thank you for tuning in. I'm Luann Manderville from Florida Today, and we're here at the Barrier Island Center in Melbourne Beach, Florida. And today it's all about Bree the sea turtle, and it's also about the Turdy Turtles. And we're going to find out from everybody here really what this whole adventure is all about. And as you can see here, they're still applying the transmitter. And I do plan to meet and talk to some of the folks real soon. If you just kind of want to keep watching the sea turtle and see what's going on.
The idea of what we're doing right now is that we're going to, there's the transmitter, we're going to attach or pour some epoxy on the bottom of it just to make sure it sets real well, okay. And then this is going to go onto her scoot onto the back of the shell. And the scoot's just one of the pieces of the shell that make up the shell. And we always go for the second scoot back as a good place, and then it will sit with the antenna towards her head. And this is the first process, the first step of the attachment process, and then we'll do a couple layers of resin and fiberglass to hold it on real good. We hope that it will last about 2 years, and then it becomes a factor of battery life, and generally 1.5 years is a good, to 2 years is a great length, but at least a year is what we're expecting. It doesn't send signals while it's underwater. It's still on, and then once it breaks the surface and this antenna comes out and one of these switches comes out, then it knows it's above water and starts sending signals. But it collects data while it's underwater, but it doesn't send it until it hits the surface.
I see.
There are 10 turtles in the educational component of the research that we're doing called the Tour de Turtles, and those 10 turtles are from a variety of different places. There are 5 from here in Florida, here in Brevard County and Indian River County, 2 from Panama, 2 from Costa Rica, and then 1 from El Salvador.
2, 1! That is beautiful, and she's already motivated!
Beautiful turtle.
I don't know what happened in the video.
I gave it to...
Blood's back here.
No. I need it.
Oh, the video camera.
Where? I need it.
Come on.
Yeah.
Run, run, run. Oh, I'm gonna send you a picture.
She had all that rest overnight. Ready to go.
See, and they say they're not paid. I think they're not that. When a lot of my friends are not
That one was about 50 pounds bigger.
10 turtles were released from different locations along the East Coast. You can go to floridatoday.com to see a longer version of that video and to get links to websites where you can track the turtles' progress. Finally today, thousands of us live in condos along the beaches and riverfront here in Brevard County. The latest in our series of how-to videos for hurricane season tells you how to prepare your waterfront condo for an approaching storm. Let's take a look.
Beach condos line Brevard County's coastline, so if you own or rent a condo, make sure you have insurance. You may not be responsible for the structural damage, but you are responsible for the things inside. So if you have anything of worth you don't want to lose, make sure it's insured and you have pictures. Renters should also speak to landlords about shutters to make sure they are provided and find out who is responsible for putting them up. Someone on each floor needs to take the role of captain, checking on residents with special needs. Know the route to the nearest stairwell. This will be especially helpful if the power goes out. If you live on a higher floor and do not evacuate, designate an interior room as a safe room. Supply it with a first aid kit, flashlight, extra clothing, blankets, a battery-operated radio, and a 3-day supply of food.
You can find a complete list of those hurricane how-to videos on our storm website at floridatoday.com. That's our show for this week. Next week we'll be in Melbourne at the Florida Institute of Technology. We'll introduce you to the Dean of the Aeronautics College, former astronaut Winston Scott. From Cocoa Beach, I'm John Kelly. Thanks for joining us.